Okay, the live streaming has started. Fine. So, greetings and welcome to SCRT B.Ed. I'm delighted and happy sharing this beautiful morning with all of you. My name is Professor Abha, and I am Principal B.Ed SCRT Delhi. I thank you all for sparing your time to participate in this webinar on exploring brain compatible learning principles and applications, which is scheduled for today, that is 9th of July 2022. We will be live streaming the webinar as usual on the YouTube for future reference. For the Q&A session, you are requested to post the questions in the comment box, or you may raise your hand and ask the question. I'm extremely elated to introduce you to Ms. Rania Lampao. She is a global educator, a STEM instructor, and an ICT teacher trainer in Greece. She has a postgraduate degree that is M.Ed in language teaching related to cognitive neurosciences, and she is also a passionate researcher on cognitive psychology, cognitive neurosciences, and neuroeducation. Currently, she is a STEM instructor at the Greek Astronomy and Space Company, and she is also working at the Greek Ministry of Education at the Directorate of Educational Technology and Innovation, where she writes STEAM projects for Greek schools. She has been awarded many national and international prizes, maybe more than 70, if I'm not incorrect. And recently, she has been selected as Global Icon 2020, featured in Passion Vista magazine among the top 10 women entrepreneurs featured in Fortune, and among the 100 most successful women in business featured in an Amazon book by Global Trade Chamber. She promotes STEM vision by introducing STEM in astronomy and physics projects and combines STEM with language teaching. She is the founder and international coordinator of many innovative international projects that focus on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals described in the 2030 Agenda. She is also an author of scientific books for kids. Furthermore, she is a social activist and a global peace ambassador. She has received 2 humanitarian awards and many peace awards from international humanitarian organizations. She's also an international executive member of Global Edu Leaders Forum, honorary ambassador of Charles Walters Society for Innovation and Research, education ambassador and member of international organizations of educators and researchers, ambassador of the National Education Policy 2020 of India, NEP 2020, international advisor of the South Asian Institute of Advanced Research and Development, Center for Peace, Advocacy and Sustainable Development, K-12 Digest Magazine, International Youth Society, Global Peace Councils, and a mentor of the 100 Mentors platform. She is an editorial board member of many journals, and she has presented her research in numerous international conferences and e-conferences, and she has published work in various journals. Thank you. That is immense work you have done. Thank you and welcome, Ms. Rania Lampo to SCRT, and we would like to know more about brain compatible learning. Over to you, Ms. Lampo.
Good morning, greetings from Greece. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here today for this webinar. Thank you very much, Dr. Appa, for your always kind invitations. And today we're going to explore this fascinating world of brain-based teaching and learning. We're going to discuss about all these principles of neuroeducation and cognitive neurosciences. What are the efficient and effective techniques and strategies that we can leverage in our classroom? And of course, we're going to discuss about these discoveries of cognitive neuroscience concerning the role of emotion in learning and many other principles. So may I share now my presentation? So the cells of the human brain are organizing themselves into networks that communicate with each other, and they store and process information and learn things. So the brain is actually a miracle. And neuroscience is undoubtedly the most active scientific field of the moment. Its specialists now have tools of incredible precision at their disposal, and they are more willing than ever to strive to uncover the most unique mechanism of our consciousness. The field of neuroscience focuses on the study of the nervous system, the scientific study of the nervous system, analyzing both its structure and its way of functioning. It belongs to the large field of family of cognitive sciences, which were first introduced in the decade of 50s. And this term was used in association with five founding disciplines: computer science, neuroscience, psychology, philosophy, linguistics, anthropology. So, however, many other disciplines were associated with it. And the cognitive sciences have experienced a tremendous rise since then. That's why we can talk about the scientific revolution. And nowadays, we can talk about a very broad interdisciplinary field where many different approaches coexist. From the decade of 80s, the constant rise in popularity and interest in the field of neuroscience has made them the pivot of cognitive sciences. So we all know about Howard Gardner, 1985, the psychologist, is the one who launched the theory of the multiplications theory around the world. He published the first history of the cognitive revolution with the subtitle The New Science of the Mind. And the decade of 90s were called the decade of the brain. A lot of new models were developed: the symbolic model, connectionism, embodied cognition, situated or distributed cognition, and evolutionary psychology. In the early of 2000, a new configuration was put in place. Today, we could say that there is no longer a dominant model in neuroscience. The development and rise of a new, what we call brain imaging techniques advance the study of brain activity considerably. So neuroscience is today at the crossroads of the biological, chemical, medical, computer, mathematical, and psychological sciences. In France, we have the famous neuroscientist Jean-Pierre Sanger. Why he's famous? He's the one who popularized the role of emotion in learning. He promotes neuroscience in the public space. Is considered as a representative of the cultivation of biology for 40 years. His two famous books, The Neural Man and The Man of Truth, have made history in the field of neuroscience. And according to Jean-Pierre Sanger, neuroscience will bring us a new vision, a new conception of man and humanity, because neuroscience inaugurates the lights of the 21st century. So the goal of neuroscience is not just, of course, to map the brain and spot the biological processes that involve in cognition, what we call the act of knowing. We now use the term cognitive neuroscience to indicate the ultimate aim and approach to understand mental operations and to identify the links between structure and functions. So cognitive neuroscience is the study of how the brain enables the mind. Brain science explores how individual neurons operate and communicate to form complex neuronal architectures that comprise the human brain. And for a long time, cognitive sciences were only focused on cognitive phenomena. However, for some time, it is the emotions which have been at the forefront of studies in this field, and the works of Oddone Damasio and Joseph Ledoux and many others help popularize the idea that higher intellectual functions are closely connected with emotions. And we talk about a new science, science of emotion, because after years of neglect by both mainstream biology and psychology, the study of emotions has emerged as a central topic. The central topic of scientific inquiry in the vibrant new discipline of neuroscience. So we have to answer the fundamental questions about the nature of emotion. What is the function of emotions? What is the role of the body in emotions? How do they relate to emotions? And why are some emotions so difficult to control? Is there an emotional brain? So emotion has a substantial influence on the cognitive processes, including perception, attention, learning, memory, reasoning, and problem solving. It has a particular strong influence on attention, especially modulating the selectivity of attention, as well as motivating action and behavior. So emotion also facilitates encoding and also helps retrieval of information efficiently. And when it comes to emotions, it turns out that there are specific regions in our brain, emotions that are actually experiences that are associated with activation of certain regions in the brain. So this region in the brain is called limbic system, is the center of emotion, which are associated with each one of the 6 main emotions. We're going to discuss about this later. And this limbic system is responsible for behavioral and emotional responses. Here you can see what are the components: hypothalamus, thalamus, amygdala, hippocampus. Hypothalamus is what controls emotional responses. It also is involved in hormone release. Hippocampus is very important because it helps preserve and retrieve memories and plays a very important of how we understand the spatial dimension of the environment. Amygdala, it's very very active issue of nowadays, because we talk about COVID pandemic and how amygdala was threatened in the organism of every person during the COVID pandemic. Amygdala helps coordinate responses to stimuli in the environment. It plays an important role in fear and anger. So it's something that we educators need to take into consideration. And thalamus is a sensory relay station where all information except for smell goes before being sent to other areas of the brain for further processing. A limbic cortex is part contains 2 structures, the cingulate gyrus and the motion structures in brain. A very important discovery nowadays is what we call brain plasticity. First of all, learning. What is learning? Learning is the metamorphosis of existing cognitive structures or the creation of new cognitive structures. So today, thanks to sophisticated brain imaging devices, it is possible to study the changes in the brain caused by student learning. The nervous system is where the main learning tool is being developed. So when we talk about plasticity, this plasticity is the spectacular capacity of the brain to reconfigure itself from a functional point of view in response to stimuli from the environment. So learning process that takes place in the brain, as said before, is a change of existing cognitive structures or the creation of new cognitive structures. Nowadays, we talk about a new approach, a new research approach that attempts to bring together knowledge in neuroscience and education, especially through imaging techniques, so what we call educational neuroscience. Neuroscience has become a major pole of attraction for several disciplines. According to a report which was published by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, it's titled Understanding of the Brain, the birth of a new learning science. This has had a great contribution to the development of neuroeducation, this new field of educational neuroscience, which is interdisciplinary because it covers multiple disciplines, including neuroscience, cognitive science, and education at the same time. So a new research approach aims to bring together knowledge of neuroscience and education, and it aims to highlight certain educational problems in order to allow the possibility to propose new solutions. In educational research, neuropedagogy has supplanted the name educational science, which have lost the ground over the years. And neuropedagogy literally means educational research based on cognitive sciences, neuroscience, cognitive psychology, or linguistics. On the other hand, learning is considered as a discipline incidental to the psychology, which was considered like this, begins to be studied as an independent branch of knowledge under the name of mathematics, whose Greek etymology refers to science and the art of learning. So, neuroeducation, why it is important nowadays? Because it makes it possible to better understand the nature of the cognitive work carried out by the learner during the performance of certain tasks, to discover the effects of different types of education, to measure the effectiveness of educational interventions, and to more quickly identify students with learning difficulties. Because in special education, neuroscience is has been proved very useful. So what are these principles of brain-compatible learning? One by one. First of all, its brain is unique. That means that we are all different and unique at the same time. We all have a distinct set of systems, but these systems are integrated differently within its brain. This makes us all different. This diversity is the result of our genetic heritage, different experiences and environments. And it must be understood that learners are different and they need choices and they should be exposed to a wide variety of inputs. Learning changes the human brain. While we learn, as I said before, two changes occur in the brain, a change in the internal structure of neurons and an increase in the number of synapses. Synapses means that more dendrites between neurons. By changing the stimulus of behavior, practical or mental exercise, the brain changes respectively. The brain is also modified by experience. That means that multiple complex and concrete experiences are important for the growth of dendrites and the healthy functioning of the brain. So the human brain is programmed to learn. And the need to learn appears to be physiological need of the brain. Learning is also developmental, is what I said before about neuroplasticity, because the brain is an organ with extraordinary adaptability and plasticity. Neurons are not fixed. Neurons are not immutable entities. The brain constantly restructures and constantly maintains its plasticity throughout its life. So the adult brain is also pliable. The brain is a multifunctional parallel processor. The brain, why? Because brain processes all information simultaneously and continuously. That means that thoughts, emotions, imagination, and predispositions work simultaneously, interact with other processes of the brain. So the brain is multifunctional since it performs multiple functions on multiple levels in different ways. It constitutes a system of adaptation and complicated activities. And in addition, the brain reduces information to parts and at the same time it perceives it globally. Brain makes choices. How the dynamics of the brain presuppose its capacity for free choice and decision making. The brain is not preformed, but structured in order to learn what it needs to learn when it is presented with the possibility of choice. And the teacher should allow everyone to update the choice potential. The brain searches for order and organization. Because brain seeks to bring order to chaos. Organization, including selection, ranking, and comparison, is a biological necessity of our brain. And the human brain works both linearly by association. Why? Because the brain does not organize our thinking in a linear fashion, but globally and in association at the same time. Why by association? Because it compares, it integrates, relates, and seeks to give meaning to what it perceives. So association plays a key role in almost all our mental functions. Each word and idea has many links to other words, ideas, and concepts. So the more associations you create in the brain, the more likely is that information will be encoded in long-term memory, and therefore it will be available for recall. And learning also presupposes connections with existing knowledge. Dendrites resemble the branches of a tree, and they develop from the branches that already exist. Therefore, when we learn a new concept or skill, the learner must first establish a connection with prior knowledge or experience. Very important, brain search for novelty, because when we learn new information, either new neural connections are made or the old ones are strengthened. So the brain learns, enriches, adapts, and assimilates the unpredictable and the new. We learn what we practice. Why practice is important? Because when we learn, because when we practice, new fibers, new dendrites grow and connect with each other, forming synapses. And practice means making and correcting mistakes, learning from our own mistakes, and trying constantly. So mistakes in neuroeducation are a natural and necessary part of the learning process, because dendrites develop for what is being practiced. And in order to learn each new concept or skill, the learner's brain builds a new specific neural network for the learning object in question. Another big, so there's a huge chapter, the chapter of attention. We could organize a webinar about this. Attention plays a big role in learning. According to research, the brain stays alert for only about 10 minutes. So in general, the dropout in a class or in an enterprise, in a company, for instance, occurs before the quarter of an hour of an activity. So the challenge here is to try to find a way to maintain and develop people's attention given time. Teacher can capture the attention of learners through a multitude, for instance, of auditory or visual, of kinesthetic inputs, new and emotional experiences and alternations. And learning always involves conscious and unconscious processes, because our brain absorbs information of which is directly aware with concentrated attention, but also it absorbs information which is beyond the immediate objective of attention. So in fact, the brain reacts to the entire sensory context within which communication occurs. And interesting, our brain seeks pleasure. Because there is a pleasure center in the brain, what we call reward circuit. It tends to desire the repetition of a stimulus or experience that causes pleasure. Every pleasant piece of information can cause the release of dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that causes feelings of euphoria in the brain with the production of endorphins, and activates what I said before, the limbic system, which is the center of emotions. In addition, this way, learning becomes more enjoyable and is positively reinforced when inner motivation, interest, and active engagement prevail. And brain learns best through a multisensory process. So, as I said before, we need multisensory experiences that involve all our senses and multiple treatments, because multisensory stimuli promote the development of the entire cortex and not just one region. That's why multisensoriality is important. Repetition builds the brain, because current neurology has shown that the creation of synaptic connections depends in part on the repetition of stimuli. So repeated experiences can create neural connections that lead to learning. Our brain is social. Our brain is social because according to neuroscience, our brain evolves and learns through interaction and experiences with others. Learning is influenced by the nature of our social relationships. The brain seems to like learning from others. Natural development alone is not enough. So this is one of the main characteristics of the human brain. And We talk nowadays about the 21st century skills and how critical thinking and how problem solving is important. For instance, STEM education has considered to be very popular because problem solving is at the heart of this new methodology. So how brain is related to problem solving? Basically, our brain is engaged in finding multiple responses to a problem rather than finding the right answer. So due to this process, and this process involves reasoning, critical thinking, and other high-level cognitive skills, we have neural growth. Neural growth takes place. So teacher here should create a challenging and relevant learning environment, reaching problem-solving activities and situations where students can build their own understanding of content, organize it, and think with the aid of their own cognitive models. Learning and processing information is something that takes time. We need time to learn because we need time to grow and connect. And dendrites and synapses perhaps will start to disappear if they are not used or practiced. This is those neurons that are not used or have never been widely used are eliminated for reasons of economy. It's what the neuroscientists say, if you don't use it, you lose it. And in addition, learners, remember that learners have optimal learning times during the day. In general, and I remember this, that learners tend to receive the most information towards the start of the course, and then they experience downtime when retention decreases. Therefore, teachers have to organize varied lessons, make the lessons shorter, and use many different teaching materials and means and aids. And our brain needs structural breaks. Sensory rest in the state of awakened consciousness allows the programming and structuring of information. We feel the educational need to provide structural breaks to create an alternation between taking information, moments of internalization, inner silence, evocation, reactivation. Why? Because the human brain cannot absorb, cannot record an infinite amount of explicit information. Our brain needs breaks in order to analyze information and replenish neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are those chemicals that transmit impulses from neuron to neuron. So if the neurotransmitters are not renewed, the amygdala that I said before, which is responsible for fear, amygdala will block information and the memory efficiency will decrease. In addition, if the hippocampus, I said before, is the place where long-term memory, where it's responsible for memory. If the hippocampus becomes overloaded, no new learning will take place. I think the important of all here is the search for meaning and the relevance of information. The search for meaning is a goal. It is oriented towards survival. It's essential for our brain. The term search or quest for meaning means giving meaning to our experiences. That means what? That new learning is more likely to be acquired and remembered if it is meaningful and relevant to the learner. New information is less likely to be rejected if it is straightforward and if it has relevance or value. So learner-centered learning should therefore be effective and meaningful. It must take into account the experiential knowledge and the personal history of learners. Meaningful learning involves the construction or reconstruction of meaning through our experiences. And patternization, because the search of meaning is done through the construction of patterns. This patternization is organization and categorization of meaningful information, because the brain mind naturally organizes information into categories. And this patternization allows us to organize and connect new learning with what we already know. That could include mind maps, for instance, semantic maps, models, and categories. Because our brain is therefore designed to perceive and create patterns. Interesting, the learning pyramid. here you can see the learning pyramid. This was founded on results of research on memorization carried out in the decade of 60s. And this shows that after 2 weeks, we tend to retain, first of all, 10% of what we read, 20% of what we hear, 50% of what we see, 70% of what we see and hear, 70% of what we say, and 90% of what we say and do. So this learning pyramid actually it clearly illustrates that active participation in the learning process results in knowledge building and retention. And of course, learning is a holistic process. That's why we talk about integrated learning. Learning is understood as a process of holistic adaptation. Each hemisphere of the brain processes information according to its specialty. It's a phenomenon known as a lateralization of the brain, and then transmits its decision to other hemispheres. In addition, its hemisphere is connected to the opposite part of the body. However, this lateralization, this specialization does not mean separation. Why? Because the two brains collaborate. The two hemispheres of the brain collaborate. The two hemispheres have complementary functions. They cooperate and interact. For many years, especially after this theory, multiple intelligence theory of Howard Gardner, we thought that the left hemisphere is the hemisphere which is associated with language skills, with logic, representation of facts, and the right hemisphere of the brain is the one who is associated with emotion, with intuition, etc. This is not true, because nowadays all the latest discoveries and findings of neuroscience tells us that actually there is no such kind of specialization. The two hemispheres constantly collaborate each other. They are both responsible for visual capacities, for motion, for intuition. We cannot actually talk about left and right hemisphere of the brain, because there are neurons, there are networks between these two hemispheres, and the two hemispheres constantly collaborate, and they must be taken both into account when we plan learning activities for students. Emotional learning, the role of emotion, as I said before, is important because everything we learn is organized by emotions, is influenced, organized by emotions and states of minds. Feelings and thoughts shape each other, they cannot be separated. And new scientific research suggests that new information that arouses pleasure is more easily stored in what we call long-term memory. So the flow of information is inhibited by fear and weakness, while positive emotions can also affect and reinforce certain types of learning. And our brain responds to positive suggestions. Our students experience both positive and negative emotions when discovering new knowledge for the first time. So teachers should promote positive experiences and emotions for the students, because negative emotions can lead to a feeling of demotion or depression that reduces students' ability to learn at an optimal level. A positive learning environment is important, so students should start teaching enthusiastically, make sure that everyone in the class feels comfortable and everyone understands. And this way, such teaching suggests that we care about the learning of each learning separately, and each positive suggestion, for instance, that could be a non-verbal communication, sends a message to the learner's brain. And when the brain learns, it reacts and adapts to the environment and its changes. Learning a new element allows him to transform its neural networks in order to assimilate it. Through this process, the brain creates new neural connections throughout its life. So the creation of environment enriched by new learning experiences and challenges, as well as stable sensory environment, is essential for brain growth. Now, what are the education applications of all that we have said so far, all these principles? The principles and strategies of effective teaching learning compatible with the function of the brain will help, of course, students to, first of all, to orient themselves towards high cognitive functions. When students are provided with learning opportunities, especially, as I said, meaningful, relevant, authentic activities with formative assessments and corrective feedback, the role of feedback also is important for the brain, the information could be consolidated in the long-term memory. If teachers take into account the function of the brain, they can discover the state of the students, their interests, their abilities, learning environment. They can better identify their needs. They can define precise learning objectives for each one and dynamically adapt teaching there. Teacher who know the principles of brain functioning seeks to maintain the attention of students through sensory, motor experiences and awaken the senses and emotions throughout the entire unit of study. Teachers provide multisensory presentations that promote brain growth and connections and support intellectual curiosity and the development of research spirit, encouraging students to suggest topics and projects likely to seem interesting to them as part of the lesson. So as at the start of the teaching, teacher embrace the power of novelty. Embrace the power of novelty means that they try to destabilize the student and associate new ideas with what the students know already, making connections between current knowledge in the new material and checking previously acquired cognitive material. They present relevant and meaningful information since the brain is rewired to pay attention to things that are relevant to each person and their survival. And teachers offer the possibility of choice and promote the development of a wide range of mental, physical, aesthetic, social, emotional interests, skills, and competencies. They should use a wide variety of methods and support. They use thought organizers that before mind maps, incorporate role-playing games, links into teaching, and knowing the importance of repetition and respecting the laws of memorization, they regularly repeat and review new knowledge using elaborate repetition by making structuring breaks and mood breaks of 5 to 10 minutes. So teachers try to involve all students in the learning process, promote active learning, give rise to various learning experiences, respect individuality of each student, opt for differentiation to respond to diversity and promote equity. So fostering equity means allowing everyone to succeed. So integrate learning into a network of social interactions, making the personal exchange a catalyst for learning, collaboration or cooperating learning and sharing knowledge. And furthermore, teachers try to create, to inspire intrinsic motivation, offer frequent opportunities for creativity development, seek to provide opportunities to reason, to deal with the subject in depth in several aspects and to express divergent thinking. So they provide enriched environments in order to develop the critical and creative spirit, promote higher order thinking aimed at deep learning and cultivating high-level intellectual skills. They favor complex activities instead of difficult activities. They try to prioritize questions instead of answers and provide immediate feedback, said before, with novelty and pleasure. So they take into account that student learning must meet a need, include important aspects, transfer of theoretical concepts to a professional reality. Why? Because adults essentially learn when they feel the need and must be able to clearly perceive the usefulness of the proposed work. So students at the same time must be able to see the usefulness of what they're doing. They learn to learn by experience independently and collaboratively. Students should involve teachers in real life learning, connect complex real world projects to personal interest using inquiry and problem-solving learning. They try to create pleasant atmosphere, exploration, and the pleasure of learning, eliminating sense of threat, pleasure, and stress and rather developing climate marked by a high degree of pleasure. Now we can mention, we won't analyze this, but it's interesting to see how the principles of mediated devices are usually based on these principles of brain, of the functioning of the brain. Mediated and interactive learning environments are systems. The main elements, the learning environment, are interrelated and dependent. So all this, for instance, we talk about the hyperactivity or non-linearity, sensory immersion, multimodality, referentiality, flexibility. All these characteristics of software today and education software and the learning, the active learning environments are based on these principles of neuroeducation. We just don't know about this. Variety, active participation of learning. Innovation and respect for learning styles, video games, how web and video games can actually shape our brain. Because today we see that the heavy use of the web changes our brain. More experience users activate more areas of the brain. And studies show that increasing exposure to images via television, for instance, a computer screens, would increase our ability to orient themselves in space. Children who have grown up with computers think very differently from adults. Their reasoning seems to work the same way as clicks or hypertext links, because they jump from idea to idea and their cognitive structures work in parallel rather than sequentially. Video games, latest social studies show that video games help develop certain areas of the brain that are essential, from everything from motor skills to orientation with respect to development and strategic planning. Of course, there are many negative aspects of video game, but we can mention also here the positive aspects. This is what I said before. This is the theory of multiple Gardner about left and right hemisphere. As I said before, this is not considered as valid anymore. All the new scientific findings are try to put this theory as controversial, to consider this as controversial, because I said before, we can, it's too simplistic to talk about left and right hemisphere. Actually, the two hemispheres intervene each other. There are networks of neurons that interact and collaborate at the same time. Now, when we design an ideal lesson plan, how this could be. First of all, we talk about this preparation. Before starting to teach learning objects, teachers need to capture the attention of students. So the best way to learn, as I said before, novelty, humor, for instance, and surprise. Because our brain is always looking for something new, it is constantly looking for stimuli. And there is a system in the lower brain known as a reticular activation system, which filters out stimuli and decides what to pay attention to and what to ignore. So there are neurons of novelty specialized in impressions of the conscious state of vigilance and attract attention. Therefore, there is a need for a teacher to vary the stimulants and not always to use the same images, for instance, the same sounds. Introduction is the most important factor in enhancing learning. The first time students are exposed to a given flow of information plays a very important role in their ability to retrieve information efficiently later. Staying focused depends on relevance and meaning. That's why teachers have to be careful with the relevant stimuli. The brain continuously tries to understand the world and defining the information it receives is relevant. And it's also necessary to use past experience in order to connect new information to prior existing knowledge. Now we have the second phase, acquisition. During classroom lessons, the inputs that could be words, text, or images in the student's brain are picked up by the senses or generated internally by them. So the teacher takes care to guide and support the student in the process of appealing to his senses. This is how we will try to strike the senses of the student by suggesting concrete examples as varied as possible. The sensory functions, therefore, allow each individual to collect information from their external environment, their organism, and this allows them to adapt to all environmental situations. These inputs are first processed in the thalamus, which is the center of passage to the cerebral cortex and the central switching area of the brain. So the cortex sends signals to the thalamus, which in turn filters those signals, distinguishes important features, and amplifies important signals and calculates the difference between the expected and observed signals. And so at the same time, the inputs are routed to other specific regions for processing, and the visual inputs are routed to the occipital lobe, and the linguistic inputs to the temporal lobe, and so on. In addition, the information is routed to the subcortical regions of the brain that we call amygdala. If there is threatening information, the amygdala is activated and it will alert the rest of the sympathetic nervous system to allow a quick response. The brain receives information directly, for example, through pressure, through lesson plans, or indirectly. So options should be provided for students who prefer visual, auditory, kinesthetic learning styles, etc. And the elaboration and acquisition of a new knowledge requires a significant investment in times of effort and perseverance on the part of the most competent students. Acting on the processing information by the learner means making the learner aware of their own resources, so the strategies they employ. And in order to process learning at time consuming, progress must be made at a slow pace with breaks. The error itself is considered as a bad connection. Learning from mistakes offers opportunity to weaken and connections. We weaken bad connections, and conceptions and prejudices are the fruit of erroneous connections which have not been erased. Learning from mistakes offers opportunity to weaken these bad connections in favor of more appropriate connections. So it's therefore essential to understand the reasons which led one to an error at the risk of reproducing it. And these wrong connections have to be understood as soon as possible, otherwise they will only get stronger and more difficult to erase. Very important, the issue of memory, because many new inputs are kept in the frontal lobe for short-term memory, which stores information for 5 to 20 seconds. Most of these inputs are filtered and then discarded without being remembered, if they are deemed to be unimportant, trivial, or not compelling enough. On the contrary, if the inputs are considered relevant, they are routed to the hippocampus and they are maintained there. Even new learning material is considered important, it is organized and indexed by the hippocampus and then stored in the cortex. And the relay station where information is processed is, before it is stored, is known as the hippocampus, as I said before. It is this small crescent-shaped structure which learns quickly but has limited memory capacity. The hippocampus organizes, sorts, and processes the incoming information before sending it to the different areas of the cortex for long-term memorization. Remember that the more associations are created in the brain, the more likely is that the information will be encoded in long-term memory and therefore will be available for recall. When information is stored in long-term memory, something quite surprising happens. New synaptic contacts appear. So the long-term effect of learning is therefore the stabilization of memory by growth of new synaptic contacts in the brain. And something which is interesting to see, remember, the want you to remember today from this webinar is that an ideal lesson is divided into 3 sections. According to the scientists, learners usually best memorize information which is presented at the start. The information memorized second is which is presented at the end of the lesson, and learners rarely memorize information which is presented in the middle. So new information should therefore be presented during the introduction and the conclusion. Hermann Ebbinghaus, someone who became famous for discovering that students forget 90% of what they have learned in class in 30 days. And he showed that the majority of this forgetting occurs in the first hours after class. And this has also been confirmed in modern times with extensive studies. So the neural pathway initially used to process new information can become a permanent route if the brain reuses the stored information. This is why repetition reinforces memory. Information requires substantial repetition by students if they want to be able to recover it. And there are several ways to improve memory. How to improve memory? That could be this way could include mental development, quality or quantity of associations created in the brain, through prior learning and motivation, through repetition, revision, emotional intensity, many ways. So memorization is facilitated by the use of heuristic diagrams, techniques which facilitate recall via the pre-existing connections between new and old information by reactivating information at effective times in order to send it to be inscribed for long-term memory. And functional integration, that means that learning involves more than just communication between neurons in a predictable sequence. Learning requires neurons to activate together, often enough to create relationships so that information can be recalled and applied in different situations. Building relationships with that the student already knows and engaging emotions can help promote long-term learning. Frequent review also helps to ensure retention and recall. So repetition as a biological effect involves the following stages. Solidity of connections, what we call myelination, acceleration of information flows, solidity of synaptic buttons, integration of processes in neural memory. New connections between neural networks can be established and strengthened, but they can also weaken and disappear. Is what I said before, if you don't use it, you will lose it. So the disappearance of connections, this disappearance of connections is called synaptic pruning. The brain deteriorates only when it is not being used. During school activities, students should be directed towards the upper regions of the brain because higher order thinking increases understanding and retention. Brain imagery shows that elaborate repetition involving higher order cognitive abilities involves the frontal lobe of the brain, and this helps learners to make connections between new and old learning, to create new pathways, to strengthen existing pathways, and to increase the possibility of consolidation and storage for future recovery. Also, all that are associated with these 4 pillars: attention, active engagement, feedback, the automation of knowledge and procedures, the transfer from the explicit to the implicit, which involves repetition and training. How this 21st century skills are related to all that? Creative thinking, critical thinking, communication. We have explained all these, have explained how principles of neuroeducation are related to 21st century skills. And what I did during the COVID pandemic, when the pandemic started, I wrote an article in the National Magazine, had a great impact all over the world. It's actually a guide to educators about how to cope with the challenges of the COVID pandemic using these brain-based strategies, because the increased use of digital tools in the learning process causes great changes in the human brain. The role of neuroscience here is important because it can help us understand the inner workings of human brain. It can help us plan a strategy to face problems related to this excessive use of digital during social distancing. And this can help teachers, it can give teachers the framework with the help of which they can develop challenging activities that could increase attention and improve memorization. Because human brain learns optimally. Learns optimally means create a maximum number of connections when it is intrinsically motivated. Intrinsically motivated is also important for student creativity. So during the quarantine, we have seen how many people, students especially, experience isolation, loneliness. They have experienced many mental health disorders and problems such as anxiety, post-traumatic stress, and many other problems. So what I suggested during online learning and during this period of social distancing, created positive emotions. Like I said before, COVID crisis took an emotional toll on children, so it's crucial to create positive emotions. And this suggestion has a universal significance, not only restricted to pandemic. The role of emotional learning is important, as said before. Feelings and thoughts are shape each other; they cannot be separated. So it's interesting, it's important for this period to encourage the students to express their feelings and their experiences of the COVID pandemic, of for instance, their family environment, because this has a cathartic role. And this also, the creation of art plays an important role. It's not accidental, but all around the world, we have seen many competitions on the topic of arts and the COVID pandemic. Why? Because this has art have a liberating role in helping children express themselves, express their internal feelings, etc. So creating positive emotions. Make learning pleasant because learning is reinforced by challenge, is inhibited by threat. Challenging activities could increase attention, improve memorization. And in this way, students will be mobilized and higher goals will be achieved. As I said before, human brain quickly erases what's not useful, what is not pleasant, and what is not the person who is learning. Develop social skills. Even in this period of social distancing, we should be able to as teachers, to place emphasis on how to develop empathy, solidarity, and altruism among our students. Our brain is social, as said before, it evolves and learns through interaction with others. Learning cannot progress well when students feel isolated and lonely. Social distancing is only physical. It shouldn't lead to isolation. For instance, we have many collaborative platforms such as bulletin boards, we have chat channels, we have asynchronous communication tools, we have blogs, we have many tools that we can leverage in order to help our students still maintain their communication and to foster their interaction and peer-to-peer support even during this period of online learning, which I know it's very difficult and boring, and it's considered boring for students and for teachers too. And develop self-awareness, encourage students to express, promote self-awareness, self-management, attention will be reduced, learning will reach an optimal level, because we need to, at the same time, to create a safe environment. Why a safe environment? Because our brain needs security. We need to reassure our students that everything is going to be okay. Social emotional learning is important. Adopt the appropriate methodology. What is support methodology is always what fits best for students to the rhythm, to the needs, to their feelings. This was a presentation. It's a huge chapter. We could talk in another webinar about social emotional learning and memory, and there are many other topics that we can discuss. I think for today I can manage to give you an idea of this fascinating world, I think, of brain-based learning, and the important how to leverage, how to apply these principles in our classroom in order to become more efficient, in order to have better results in our classroom. For any question, of course, I'm here. It's for that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Rania Lampo, to make our webinar so helpful and worthwhile. I would like the students may ask their questions, if any. Or by the time if they get ready, I may ask. Rania, which activity do you think is essential to promote the active learning? Or you can say, or increase the attention of students during the teaching learning process?
Anything that has to do with collaboration.
Okay.
Even with during online learning, that I said before, even online learning and distance learning, we should try to design collaborative activities.
Okay, and how do you think that the brain respond? Does the brain respond differently to the positive suggestions and differently to the negative suggestions, or it's likewise?
This is
Same.
what is for, because in negative suggestions, there is amygdala that blocks threatens information. If the stimuli we give to our students is negative, or it's not relevant, or it's not useful, or it's not pleasant, this won't be stored to the long-term memory, and so it won't be recalled, because brain erases what's not useful or pleasant, not pleasant. So we need positive suggestions always, and start the lesson with something new, with novelty, with humor, with surprise. I said also, remember that learners memorize best at first, the information was presented at first and at the end. They rarely memorize what we say in the middle. So we need to take attention of the introduction and conclusion.
Harpreet, please mute. Harpreet, please mute. Okay. Riddhi, you want to ask question? You raised your hand.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
You can put on your camera, please.
Yes, sure, ma'am.
Everyone can put on their cameras, please. Yeah.
Firstly, thank you so much, ma'am, for the insightful session. You have beautifully discussed about the relation of neuroscience with the process of learning. So, as a teacher, do the concepts of neuroscience play any role in assessment and evaluation?
Because we need to create assessments, rubrics of assessment based on these principles. And that's why now, after the pandemic, with online learning, we talk about new methods of assessment. We need to radically change all the system of how we evaluate this. It's not easy to evaluate, for instance, the degree of collaboration, the problem solving, the degree of critical thinking. It's not easy to create, because still, unfortunately, traditionally, we use the same old traditional ways of assessment. But the truth is that we need to change all that, and creating the rubrics. I think it's the best way for us as educators to deal with issues of assessment. Feedback plays important role. That's why in interactive learnings and platforms, feedback is always there. Now with artificial intelligence, all these new apps that we now in platforms of artificial intelligence, also they are based on feedback and assessment. So yes, we need to design new kind of rubrics based on 21st century skills. And of course, this is how this is related to brain, how brain is respond to this. Because unfortunately, so far we use traditional methods of evaluation.
Yes. Mahima, you want to ask? Shall I do the needful on your behalf? Mahima, you have asked in the chat box. Okay, Rania, there's a question from Mahima Kashyap. She's a student of second year of B.Ed. She has asked a couple of questions here, that how can neuroscience help her in honoring diversity in my classroom?
Like I said before, if we use multisensoriality, in this way we respect at the same time visual styles, we respect kinesthetic styles, we respect those who learn better when they hear something or they see and they act at the same time. It's the learning pyramid that I said before. So the diversity of means of strategies of instructional designs, the diversity of what we use in classroom, this respects automatically the diversity of our students. So we need to adopt a diversity of techniques, not use the same and the same, because our students are different, as I said before. We are all have the same set of skills, but we're different. Its brain is unique, but at the same time, it's different. Its brain. So multimodality, I think it's the key.
Furthermore, she has asked that how can neuroscience help her mold her pedagogical styles?
Is that I said before that if we try to start to implement this, to practice, and then you can see how pedagogical style will change. If we try to adopt this in action, we will try to apply this. Especially when it comes to emotion, because emotion, as I said before, is something which is underestimated for years, and now it has taken a meteoric rise nowadays, and especially now students suffering from mental health disorders, as I said before. So students have more and more need for help. So our pedagogical style, our challenge now as educators is not how to use this online platform or not. The challenge is how to help the students to cope with these mental problems. We are not anymore input providers. We are psychologists, we are advisors. We have multiple roles at the same time. So pedagogical competencies is the number one that we need to perfectionize. The number one.
And Jyoti, another student, has asked that are the early experiences crucial? Can they make or break the child's further growth? Or are children resilient? Can later experiences make up for the earlier ones?
Early experiences are very, very crucial.
Yes.
And say my own experience. But still we can make, of course, early interventions are very, very important. And I think that maybe, although in adolescence also, we should guide students and help them in any kind of challenge or problem that they may have. Early interventions are the most important, but also adolescent is a formative period because the students are facing through, adolescence is a critical period. They are rebels and students are trying to be revolutionary, etc. So even in this age, we need to be on alert.
Yes. There's one more question from a student named Karnika, and she says that in the era of digital and blended learning, how brain compatible strategies can maximize learning. Can you elaborate with a couple of examples, please?
Yes, this is also said before that this article that I wrote during the COVID pandemic, this concerned the digital and blended learning, is how to use, for instance, there are many wealth of a treasure of digital tools, free digital tools that we can use in order to make learning pleasant. For instance, they can create students digital comics, or they can create storytelling. Using the digital, of course, part, but at the same time is something that helps higher order thinking skills At the same time, promotes intrinsic motivation, promote pleasure. As I said before, the reward circuit of the brain, the pleasure center of the brain, the limbic system. Everything that helps students express themselves. And again, the role of communication and collaboration, because even in these collaborative platforms, there are many features that we can leverage in order to help the student foster interaction. So digital blended learning create positive emotions, make learning pleasant, design activities that could increase attention and improve memorization, because during online learning, the students are bored. You know, it's at least here, it's something which has failed. Online learning has generally in public schools has failed. There are many complaints from teachers. I don't know what happened in India, but here in Greece, something that went not so well. So it's up to us to make learning more interesting. Anything that tries to engage a student actively. So it depends on what activities we should give. And of course, leverage digital. There are many that we can try to use and make learning more enjoyable.
Yes. Okay, please allow me to ask the last question. It's just on the lighter note. You know, the Indian mothers generally believe that eating almonds sharpens their, brains of the children or everybody's brain and improves the memory as well. So is it true worldwide?
I think it's a myth.
Okay. Okay. So everyone, please put on the camera and someone can take the group pic, please. So thank you again for helping us become aware of brain compatible learning with the goal of providing a richer educational experience. I think all teachers can benefit from a deeper understanding of the principles and applications of brain compatible learning. We hope, Rania, you will again join and speak to us by visiting SCRT Delhi, India. And thank you all for participating so well. This is Professor Abha signing off on behalf of SCRT. Stay tuned, stay connected, stay happy, stay blessed, keep learning, and keep innovating. Bye-bye and take care of yourselves. Thank you. We can have a group pic if you allow.